Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Monday, everybody. Today I am joined by my friend and colleague Alex Amorosi, and we are going to be breaking down your horoscopes for the month of September. We've got a few key transits that we're going to be looking at for all 12 signs, and it's really great to be back doing a podcast with Alex again because over the summer it was a little hit or miss for our schedules, and I was traveling, and Alex actually stepped in a few times for me and did some horoscopes, which I know you gave some great feedback about. I know you guys love Alex when Alex is here, so really glad to have him back today. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. Share your comments in the comment section. You guys know that helps the channel to grow. And if you want, you can find a transcript of any of my daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. Next week, we're going to be starting to promote my fall program, which begins in November, Ancient Astrology for the Modern Mystic. It's a one-year course in Hellenistic astrology. I'll be telling you more about that this week. If you want to go check it out, head over to nightlightastrology.com and look at the courses page. It's the first-year program that starts in November. And if you have any questions about that or any of the readings you find, you can email info@nightlightastrology.com. Well, on that note, I'm really glad to welcome Alex back to the show. Hey, Alex.
Adam!
Yay!
Back together.
Yes, at last.
Made it work.
It was an eventful summer. I mean, certainly, I know we were just talking about it, but, you know, for a lot of people out there, for both of us, it was there's big transits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's been like, and it's been as an astrologer or maybe someone who's just really into astrology. You just got a masterclass on Leo and Taurus this summer. Oh
totally.
my God.
Yeah.
Yeah,
big time. And yeah, gosh, I heard so many. I mean, over the course of especially July and August, I'd say 75% of my client readings seem to be focused on the Venus retrograde in particular. Yeah. So that was a huge transit. Yeah. Well, I know that everyone really appreciated having you here filling in for me a few times while I was gone and participating in horoscopes over the summer, but it's nice to get the band back together now.
Yeah, I agree. It was really fun to do that, and I'm just grateful, entrusting me with this wonderful community. It was really fun.
Mm-hmm.
Really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. If you guys want to learn more about Alex, if this is your first time meeting Alex on the show, you can learn more about him at alexamorosi.com, where you can learn more about his different offerings, his readings and healing services that he provides as a energetic healer as well. And you can also learn more about and follow Alex's work, especially his astrology work, on Instagram at Alex Amorosi Healing. I'll promote that again at the end just in case you missed it. But yeah, so Alex, we're going to look at, actually speaking of the Leo-Taurus axis, that has been our focus over the summer. It has to be this month again because the biggest transits of the month are once again across the Leo-Taurus axis. Let's go through them a little bit here. So this is the real-time clock, September 1st, everyone, you can see on the screen. We have on September 3rd, Venus will turn direct in the sign of Leo. So let's scoot this up here, and you'll see the little S under Venus right here. And so that's the indication that Venus is changing directions on September 3rd. We're going to see that change of direction really over the course of the 3rd, 4th, 5th, right around that time, or even the 1st and 2nd. You give it like 3 to 5 days about for a planet like Venus to be turning direct. And then just a few days later, we have, by the way, Mercury is retrograde at the same time. So just a few days later, we have Mercury will be Cazimi at the heart of the sun. And that's taking place right around September 6th. We're going to talk a little bit in some of the horoscopes today about the fact that Mercury is finishing its retrograde in the sign of Virgo this month. It'll be turning direct, Mercury will, on the 15th of September. Now, we also have a couple of transits from Venus that are going to complete the process that Venus started all the way back in June. So Venus will go through a square once more to Jupiter. You're going to see that square from Venus to Jupiter on September 17th. Now, we saw that square back in June, and we saw it again in August. Now we're seeing it for the final time after Venus is direct in right about the 16th. And then the last major transit from Venus that Venus has also done twice already is Venus's square to Uranus. So the square to Uranus will come, let me put it up, on September 29th, at the very end of the month. And that square we've also seen twice earlier in the summer through direct motion, through retrograde motion, and now again through direct motion. So two major events this month would be the Mercury retrograde completing its work in the sign of Virgo, Venus retrograde completing her work in the sign of Leo, and then pushing back through those squares to Jupiter and Uranus. So a lot of action across the Leo-Taurus axis this month. And then you could say for some signs out there, especially double-bodied or mutable signs, you're going to see some action from Mercury stationing and turning direct as well. Now, there's some other notable transits that I covered in the major transits of the month of September at the end of last week. You might want to take a look at that video because we don't cover every single transit when we do our horoscopes. We try to focus on the biggest dynamics of the month and narrow them down for all 12 signs. But take a look at that video if you want to see what else is going on, and then follow my channel throughout the month as we take deeper dives into all of the transits one at a time as they're coming up. But what Alex and I are going to do today is we're basically going to be taking a look at the Leo-Taurus axis. Again, for some people, we might throw in the Mercury retrograde finishing up in Virgo, and then other things that jump out at us as we go along. So let me just put this back to the beginning of September. Any general impressions for the month of September you want to share, Alex, before we get started?
I mean, it feels like the concluding act of the play of Venus's retrograde. You know, usually what I find when there's a 1, 2, 3 pass like this with a planet, where you get a direct motion aspect, then you get a retrograde aspect, and then a redirect motion aspect. There's a I find that redirect, which we're in now, the third pass, tends to be a little bit more like the concluding act. Like the first pass, the opening is like kind of like the opening, what's going to be discussed here. The retrograde tends to be like a processing or going over that information or an unpacking of it. And I feel like the third pass is the opportunity to start to tie up some knots and bring the story to some kind of conclusion. That's kind of the general sense I get from this.
Yeah, I feel like another way of putting it's very similar to what you just said, Alex, is that the first pass in direct motion is sort of like the hint as to what's coming. And the retrograde is often where, you know, there's an eruption of unconscious material. And then in the direct motion, it's like I'm integrating, I'm processing, I'm healing, I'm recovering, I'm gaining the insights, or I'm putting things into action, but it's sort of cleanup duty.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like that's really where we're heading this month. And especially, you know, great ally for that is Mercury's long stay in Virgo, in terms of putting things together, making them precise, getting them in order, refiling, you know, your inner world in a way. So I think we've got a lot of allies this month in that journey.
And I like that Mercury's retrograde at the outset was almost conjoining Mars, but it refrained, goes backward, and at the end, it's stationing, turning direct, and refraining from an opposition to Saturn. So it's really interesting the way that Mercury has sort of carved this careful path around the malefics from start to finish, as well as Mercury being protected in its own chariot, in Virgo, in its exaltation, in its own domicile. As we're in the mix of it right now, and I should knock on wood as I say this, it has felt like a pretty constructive retrograde, and it's felt like a one that's not been like, oh, look at as everything completely goes off the rails, and you know you're whatever. You know, the ways in which things haven't worked, I have felt like have been very informative and helpful, and it almost feels like a useful little chiropractic adjustment for Mercury this time. There's some Mercury retrogrades really feel chaotic, and it just hasn't felt that way thus far.
No, it's felt in a very Virgo fashion, quite orderly. It's like, well, it's happening for a reason, and we're doing it for this. You know, it's like
yeah, totally.
You know,
it's so interesting. Like I'm just reflecting, and we'll go over this maybe when we hit the Taurus horoscope. But as a Taurus rising, it's in my 5th. And one of the things that I did was I made some helpful adjustments to my macros, which for people who don't know is the split between, say, your carbs, your protein, and your fat that you'll track when you're, you know, like I go to the gym. So my trainer gives me macro, like ideally hit around this many calories and this split of like protein to fat to carbs. And adjusting the macros has made a huge difference. And that's been happening in my 5th house, which is a lot to do with pleasure. It's like, how do I get those treats into my meal without having too many carbs or blah blah blah. And I like made some adjustments in my diet. I think it's making a really big difference.
Yeah.
And I just feel like that's the kind of retrograde it's been so far. Like I haven't heard total horror stories of everything going completely off the rails for people. There's usually been like a kind of revisionary energy that's been very constructive and helpful overall.
Yeah, and I think, especially because we have that wide trine to Jupiter and Mercury moving back through a trine to Jupiter too. There's a little bit of like, my friends have had a couple things like this, Adam, where it's just been like, that could have been a disaster, but actually it's turning out to be the best thing that could have happened. Or that could have really, something happened that could have really, been annoying or really difficult to deal with. But actually, it's going to turn out to be a positive path. I mean, you can hear Jupiter in what they're saying, right? It's a positive path forward with possibilities. And like,
Yes.
so I think it is very constructive in that way. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, totally. Well, let's put the real-time clock up and dive in. So here we go. I'll start off with Aries, and then Alex and I are going to switch off, and at the end chime in for each other's takes, and that way we'll split up the signs a little bit in terms of who's leading. Let's starting with Aries, the important aspects, and we went over those dates if you want to go back to the beginning, but Venus turns direct on the 3rd. You've got the square to Jupiter from Venus to Taurus on the 17th, and then the 29th, Venus square Uranus. So it breaks up the month really nicely. Beginning is the direct motion. Middle of the month is the square to Jupiter. End of the month is the square to Uranus. Now, let's go ahead and take a look here for Aries. This is a 2nd, 5th house dynamic, and it has been all summer long. The succedent houses were defined primarily in terms of things that in time would become more powerful or more prominent. So there's a lot of things that are in these houses are things that are in the process of being developed. And that in time they become more potent if we give them energy and attention. So I think right now about creative endeavors that could bear fruit in terms of money or resources, the 5th house, 2nd house connection. I think about how we spend our time, money, energy, and resources for the sake of fun, pleasure, enjoyment, creativity, recreation, and that right now there's been a several months worth of emphasizing these areas. So on the one hand, you could see someone who doesn't spend their time, money, energy, or resources in the right way, getting feedback to improve upon something or revise something. You could also see someone getting the feedback saying, hey, are you having any fun? Are you enjoying yourself? Do you feel creatively satisfied? If not, adjust the way you're using your time, your energy, your money, or your resources. You could get feedback for someone who might be, maybe you're drinking, eating, smoking, dancing too much. Like you can't ever dance too much, maybe. But maybe you are.
I don't know, man. I've done it. I think I've done it when I was younger.
It's funny, like while Venus was squaring Uranus, we went, Ashley and I went and saw Pink perform here in Minneapolis.
So jealous.
She's so cool, man. And she has this song, I think it's called I'm Never Gonna Not Dance Again. I think that's how it goes. But anyway, this would be, Pink would not like my read on that horoscope.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, if you've been like, for example, the 5th house in a Venus retrograde can be about an alcoholic hitting a rock bottom. So where the pleasure principle can be a beautiful part of the 5th house, or it can be a problematic part. So looking at that right now, Venus Jupiter can be about extravagance or expensive taste or overindulging. That might be some of the feedback that Arians are getting. But also, again, like, what are you investing in for your future, and does it bring you joy? This could be about people looking at their budgets and deciding whether or not they can afford to have another child, or family planning could come up in this combination as well. So there's some of the things that I'm seeing for Aries right off the top. And then the other thing I would add in for Aries that I have my eye on for the month of September is the development of Mars in Libra in your 7th house. That is your ascendant ruler. The planet that rules our ascendants in horoscopes can be very powerful. And so we have a debilitated Mars traveling along with the South Node in Libra in the 7th house. I wonder if now through, a good way through October, there aren't some challenges in relationships, things you're confronting, difficult choices, conversations that you have to have, the distribution of power, responsibility in relationships as topics that you're looking at as well. Probably not the easiest, but with some diplomacy and tact, you might be able to get some solid things done, or even find some allies or people to partner with. But it would probably require some skilled negotiating. So those are some of the things I'm seeing for Aries. You want to add anything in?
Yeah, I think, one of the things I'm also noticing with Aries rising here is you have Capricorn as your midheaven, which is known for its ambition and its hard work and its due diligence, not always known for enjoyment. And I feel like with Venus squaring your Jupiter and Uranus in your 2nd house, there's an opportunity here to see, it doesn't have to be your career, but I think I've gone over this in some of the horoscopes I've done for you too, Adam. But are you open to ways that income can come in, or even just a boost in the way your self-worth or your self-value is held within you, that has some enjoyment to it? Like, I keep thinking of you starting an Etsy shop or an art shop or something like that. Like, even if it's just something on the side that feels like it allows you to creatively express yourself, that maybe doesn't turn into your sort of primary career, but it's like, I feel like with Venus in that 5th house, it's in her joy. It's just such a strong placement for her to go back over the things of what brings me enjoyment in terms of the way related to Jupiter and Uranus. I might generate some income from that, even if it's not a primary career.
Agreed. Yeah, there's sometimes the 2nd and 5th will get played out like, you're going to change the way you do business or work entirely, as in order to satisfy your creative skills or gifts. So the truth is that the 5th house, like, this world is not super supportive of 5th house people. It's like, my daughter was just recently asking me, like, she said she wanted to be an artist to someone at school, like a summer camp that she was at. And they go, well, there's some kid, and this is like a 2nd grader. They go, well, artists don't make any money. Oh my second God. Second grade. Jeez. I was like, holy crap. I mean, that's early to be. So I just was like, she was like, is that true? And I was like, well, the world doesn't always appreciate art. And I said, think about it when we go, to the store, we go out, we have to get things. You don't really see a lot of art shops, do you? And she was like, oh yeah, and I was like, that's not because art isn't beautiful or valuable or you shouldn't do it. It's just that the world doesn't always value art as much as maybe it should. And so we were talking about that, and it's just like, when I'm with clients too, it's like the 5th house is tough because, well, in this world in general, Venus is not well, I would put it this way, like the artistic side of Venus is not something that a lot of people will find themselves becoming, wealthy from, or even able to like support or sustain themselves through. And but I would say that bringing elements of creativity, bringing elements of Venus or the 5th house into the way we're doing our life, that you can satisfy your creative, you can find creative outlets in a lot of ways. And I think that the challenge may be from the 5th house to 2nd house is, how do I honor, acknowledge, and incorporate more of Venus into every area of my life so that there's just more Venus growing in the garden, so to speak.
Agreed. And that can be so, even if it doesn't turn into this is what I actually do for my work, it can provide you that outlet that makes you feel so much more fulfilled and happy, and even enhances the rest of your life in a lot of ways, just to have that creative outlet and expression. And it can look in so many different ways.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to Taurus rising. We'll put Taurus on the ascendant. The Taurus banner is blocking Venus in the 4th house, so I'll take it down. But you can, why don't you start us off on this one?
That Taurus banner took the place of the arrow, the mega arrow.
I know, right?
All right, so Taurus rising. We have Venus starting to turn direct in your 4th house, squaring Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus in your 1st house. One of the immediate things that comes to me about this is, maybe having gone through in the retrograde, looking at unconscious patterns or unpacking of ideas of your relational style from ideas that you've inherited from your ancestry, your parents, or the environment that you grew up in, your sort of primary nurturing environment when you were growing up, and seeing how, maybe that's affecting your belief structure, Jupiter in your first house, the way you sort of hold yourself within your belief structure, and how you present yourself to the world. I think, a lot of times I definitely discovered this in a lot of therapy over the years, that we don't realize how often what we're presenting to the world is a culmination of so much of our ancestral lineage, and especially the way we relate to others and our relational style. So I'm wondering if that's getting unpacked for you a little bit this month. And then maybe, with Mercury in your fifth house, that's, Mercury going retrograde in your fifth house, having its cazimi with the sun. There's some understandings around the way you think about kids, having kids, the way you relate to your kids already, or talk to or communicate or think to your kids or think about kids. Or even in the way that you get a little bit more precise about the things creatively that you want to draw into the world. So that's my opening salvo on Taurus.
Yeah, I like that. The combination of changes around home, family, roots, living environment, ancestral karma is so intimately tied to how Tauruses are reconfiguring their own identities right now.
Yeah.
And, whether that means that you're becoming a parent, or that means that you're moving to be closer to family or moving away from family, there are decisions that have to do with where I came from, my parents, my roots, where I belong, and who I'm becoming, or who I want to become, and how I want to expand or grow or change. I mean, Jupiter Uranus in the next year for Taurus risings is like a little personal renaissance for Tauruses. It's like, well, right now the choices are, the foundation for that renaissance is being laid as it relates to matters of home and family, or ancestral history, or something like that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that, one of the constant sort of inner workings that we have as we get older, one of the inner, maybe the inner balance we're trying to figure out, is who am I individually in my style, and how do I also incorporate the best of my lineage into my style, and then how I'm presenting into the world. It's a really interesting balance we strike as we get older.
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably nothing else that really jumps out at me for Tauruses this month, than, since it's angular, and the first house is so emphasized. Like, I suspect this is exactly where the action is. It is interesting that the fifth house has the Mercury retrograde, maybe a bit of creative revision. For example, as a Taurus rising, I find it interesting that during the completion this month of September, I'll be returning to take guitar lessons for the first time since I took some when I was young, but otherwise have just been self-taught and fiddling around. So this will be the first time that I've taken guitar lessons. That's really interesting for me to see that Mercury retrograde in the fifth house of creativity. Maybe some emphasis on changes around creativity and joy and fun and pleasure and recreation and things like that as well.
Yeah. And taking lessons too. So formalizing it, a very Virgo idea, right? Sort of making it excellent and getting precise and that sort of idea. I love that. It's great.
Yeah, totally. And I suspect that the guitar teacher that I will be working with, I don't know his astrological profile, but I look at him and I'm like, he's got to be a Virgo. I have a feeling. So, and he's really
music teachers are Virgos, Adam. Trust me, as a musician.
Yeah, well, right.
There's a lot of Virgo in the music world. Yeah.
Right. That's funny. Okay, let's see here. Let's go to Gemini on the ascendant. Let's put that up. So with Gemini on the ascendant, I'll take this one to start us off. We've got the connection between Venus and Jupiter and Uranus across the 3rd and 12th house axis. Now, this is interesting because when you think of the process of Jupiter Uranus in the 12th house, it's a curious place for a Jupiter Uranus conjunction, because that conjunction is so much about the transcending of limitations and the breaking out of habits and behaviors that we feel stuck in. But the 12th house is by its very nature a pretty stuck place. It was called the joy of Saturn, and it's considered a blind spot for the native. Like, this is the spot that you can't see. This is the material that keeps you stuck in the most self-destructive or unconscious behaviors and habits and patterns. Well, one thing that Jupiter Uranus can do very positively then is deliver breakthroughs that come as these eruptive moments from the unconscious. It's like the unconscious releases that potential for breakthrough and evolution and sort of transcendence. But it releases, by being released from the unconscious, it means that we're grappling with something difficult or something that's been in the shadows. So, that is the definition in many ways of a healing crisis that's ultimately very positive, but you sort of can't get there unless you encounter it through the 12th house, which is a place of shadows. So, it reminds me a bit of a psychedelic experience where some of the worst trips are the best ones. The worst experiences lead to the most positive, significant changes in lifestyle and behavior and mind. And connect that also to Venus retrograde in the 3rd house. One area of unconscious exploration could be about the way that we act and behave unconsciously every single day with other people. Because the 3rd house is called the joy of the moon, and it's sort of like the fish in the water. They don't know that they're swimming in it. And I've used that example a bunch before with the 3rd house. But when Venus is retrograde in the 3rd house, it's like all of your very everyday sort of habits and behaviors in relationships, in love, with siblings or with neighbors or with coworkers, people that are like the fish swimming around in your little tank with you every day. There's so much. Like we jokingly one time called the 3rd house the junk drawer, but the reason for that is because it's filled with all of this like common stuff that you can really take for granted, but that is so much a part of your everyday life. The moon is, in ancient astrology, the 3rd house is literally like a depiction of everything that's constant in your environment around you day in and day out. So when Venus is making changes in that area, it usually means that the way you relate to other people is going through a significant change. That could be, for example, new neighbors are moving in, or it could be that your sister's getting married, or the people who are in your life on the regular, that there are changes in them, in their lives, that are coming in and dramatically changing the environment. Or it could be that now we're adding in the 12th house, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, that there are eruptions of unconscious material that are forcing you to look at the relationships that are very everyday, very common, and starting to see things that you weren't able to see previously about them. See patterns of thought, behavior, and communication in yourself and others around you that you weren't able to see before. But it could also put you in contact with unconscious patterns or material, with siblings or with sisters, in particular with Venus, or with women in your everyday environment, or something like that. So, and I would also just look at Venus as the pleasure principle and as the beautifying principle, and how she is present in the everyday environment that you live in through beauty and pleasure, and how you're needing to look at that. What kind of shadow material exists around beauty and pleasure in your everyday life? The Jupiter-Uranus conjunction ultimately is trying to create a breakthrough for Geminis right now, in contact with this kind of Venus.
Oh, I love all that, Adam. I'm thinking of actually a time in my life. I think Jupiter was actually transiting my 12th house. I think it was when Jupiter was in Cancer. I had a really skilled therapist as my first therapist, and he did a little bit of therapy jujitsu on me one session, just kind of came out this very subtle little thing that he said that blew me back in my chair. That was an unconscious pattern that I had for many years that was causing a certain relational thing to keep happening. And I think I sat there for about a minute and a half, just didn't talk. I was so it was like the light had gone on. It was a very Jupiter-Uranus moment I didn't have Uranus there, but a 12th house moment where all of a sudden I can't unsee this. And it forever changed the way that I relate to other people. It changed what was even happening around me just from that one little tiny lightning strike that came in.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's just an example of what you're saying. But I also, my eye keeps getting drawn to a great ally here, which is Pluto in your eighth house. I think that there's something related to that Pluto of really digging through the deeper, energetic, longer, more bound connections you might have to other people, and how that's been going on below the surface and where you might not have been able to see it. I think Pluto plays a role for you in the eighth house this month too. My eye
Mm.
just went right there as soon as we started talking about this.
Yeah, if there's things you need to see about other people, that's
Yeah.
a great point. That is likely involved, especially the 12th house, which tends to reveal secrets as well. With
Yeah.
Uranus in the Venus to Uranus in the 12th. Surprise! Here's something you haven't been able to see.
Right. And then, like you said, Adam, that helps change your everyday environment, what's going on around you, because you begin to see it very differently within you.
I'll just mention really quick. I should mention this before we go on to Cancer. That the Mercury retrograde and turning direct in the 4th house would suggest some tie-in to, your home, your family, your living environment. That there are probably some reorderings of some kind happening there at the same time. That's kind of interesting that Mercury is also trining that Jupiter and eventually the Uranus in the 12th house as well.
For sure.
Let's go on to Cancer.
All right. So Cancer rising, we have Venus turning direct in your 2nd house. We have Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus in your 11th house. I could see this as coming into a sense of maybe really understanding the value of your own resources, and maybe in how they have been in relationship to people within a social professional network. I just, I've really been thinking a lot, Adam, about Venus in Leo this summer as value and what we value and our values. And I feel like there's something here about maybe taking a stand for, or understanding like my resources have value. What I produce into the world, what I bring into the world has value. It is something that can help prop me up and hold me up. That succeeding house to the 1st house as the 2nd house. But I think also there's might be something that comes as a blessing or a sudden kind of out of the blue understanding that comes about that that idea of value through the 11th house topics, which I always think of as networks. I know we think of it as allies traditionally, or people who are benefactors, but people who you are in relationship with, but I think you usually more in sort of like a professional way, or a way that gives you like a leg up, and those sorts of ideas.
Yeah, I like the idea of allies, that there a change of values reflects a change in who you consider your people to be, or your friends or allies to be. I wonder about, the evaluation of different business deals or arrangements. And also a shift. If you think about the 11th house as the house of long-term dreams, hopes, and wishes, which is one of the primary things that it represented, as it was called the joy of Jupiter in the house of, wishes and aspirations. How are your long-term dreams, goals, and personal aspirations changing right now? Maybe in relation to a change of business, a change around money or resources, or just a shift in values. What Venus, when we say change in values, what we really mean, I think, when we say that with Venus, is a change in what we find desirable. What is beautiful, what is valuable to me. And as that is changing, then our long-term dreams and aspirations are changing. And that's also probably going to bring new people or new social dynamics into our life. It's like, well, if I want to be, if I decide I really want to be a parent, and I'm going to choose that over, say, working more, well, that's going to change. Not only does it reflect a change in values and a change of long-term aspirations, but it probably changes who you're going to spend your time with. You'll spend your time with other parents, or whatever the case may be. That's just an example that comes off the top of my head. But I think the point we're both making here is that when whatever Venus reflects as a change around energy or time and resources in the second house is going to be correlated to people and groups on some level.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember the exact saying. There's a saying in a lot of motivational literature about, like, the people you surround yourself with, some reflect how what you hold to be important, or something like that. There's a couple of phrases I've heard like that. And I think that could definitely, there could be some revisions that you might be looking at or have looked at during the retrograde process that now are being implemented as Venus starts to go direct.
My wife is a Cancer rising, and I can't help but notice that as Mercury is retrograde in the third house, that place of everyday environment, that she is preparing for an entirely new schedule as we now have both of our kids going to school. So babysitter schedule has to change, driving to school and picking up, and it's like a whole new daily organization that she's been working on. It's very Virgo, Mercury retrograde in Virgo in the third house,
Yeah.
But it could be something like that going on for Cancers right now, where there's the need to reorder, reorganize, or implement new ways of being in your everyday activities.
So that's a great illustration of the third house too, Adams. All those things you don't really think about that are so everyday that just form the environment's container of your day.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So for Leos, we have Leo rising on the Leo on the ascendant now, and Venus is going to be finishing her retrograde in your first house, squaring Jupiter and Uranus in the 10th. So you got these angular houses, which are super strong for Leo risings, and I'm sure Alex, as a Leo rising, can speak to this. But I mean, first of all, Venus retrograde over the course of the summer is probably about a significant shift of personal. It's very personal. So the change it can be a change in identity, a change in appearance, a change in wardrobe, a change in how you think or present yourself to the world. It can also be about, quite literally, how you are going through a transformation because of changes in relationships. Who am I after a breakup, or who am I now that I'm getting serious with someone? That can be part of Venus retrograde in the first house. Now, this would also be coming along with significant breakthroughs, development, and a kind of an aspirational and evolutionary thrust that's happening in the 10th house of career. I can't help but notice, Alex, you're the Leo rising here, that you're this summer, your business and your astrology work you've got a newsletter coming out. It's like you've really started. I mean, it feels like Jupiter Uranus in your 10th house right now.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, but maybe you could reflect more on this for us, but just the connection between what I feel called to do, maybe professionally, or what do I want my reputation or my skills or my abilities to be, and how do I want to contribute to the world, coinciding with a pretty deep transformation of identity that's happening right now for Leos.
Well, yes, Adam, yes to all of that. Check every single box you just said. It's literally my life. I mean, it's exactly what's happening. So yeah, I mean, my identity is shifting. I am, getting pretty serious with someone where, after being single for a very long time, and having established a whole identity about, I am single and I'm fine being someone independent. And then this amazing guy walks into my life, and we're really getting serious now. It's been 6-7 months, and it's like really turning into something, and it's amazing. And but it is a big shift in my identity, and more so than I think I had anticipated. That just like, I was this, I was in this independent place, and I was kind of lonely, but now I'm with this amazing person. And then that comes with the responsibilities that I'm very happy to have of a relationship, but it's a whole different way that I'm starting to see myself, which has really gone into full force over the summer. That's when, things have really started to move. And, with Jupiter and Uranus, I've taken what I do a lot more seriously. I think that I have added a little bit more discovery of, like, one thing I always say to yoga teachers, because that's just kind of my primary way that I've understood my teaching work, is, what kind of yoga teacher do you want to be? And I've been thinking this summer a lot about, what kind of astrologer and healer do I want to be? How do I want my astrology? Where do I want the thrust of my astrology work to be? how can I be of most benefit, and refining that. So that's all been really up for me
Yeah.
this summer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can track that for Leos in general right now, that for all of you out there, the question is, how are you changing as a person, and what does Venus have to do with it? And then how are those changes tracking alongside of this kind of energy of acceleration, expansion, and evolution taking place in the career house? And I think that, the other thing that you might add in a little bit is, right now, for this little window in September, Mercury's also doing some work in your house of money, resources, finances. You might see some shifting around there somehow as well.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead to Virgo rising. Put Virgo on the ascendant and hand it over to you.
All right. So Venus turning direct in the 12th house. This is really interesting to me. So, I have been reflecting a lot, I think as all astrologers have, on the archetypal Leo and Taurus this summer, just because we've been talking about it all summer with this relationship. And, there's a quality to Leo where I think Leo is a very prominent sign. It's very noticeable. It's not always a very extroverted sign. There's a lot of the idea of like the king or the queen on the throne in the palace type of idea. And I'm wondering if this Venus retrograde in your 12th house has had you maybe look at some places, some blind spots, some places where you may not have been able to see, that you've kept yourself isolated in some way, or felt like you needed to be isolated, or maybe went through a period of time where there was a process of healing that needed to happen in a more sort of contained environment. But now you're thinking a little bit more about, how might I bust back out into the world, especially with Venus going to square Uranus in your 9th house. That's an easy riff I could do on that, is, traveling again, or moving out into the world again in a bigger, more prominent way. An adjustment of Jupiter and Uranus, both in your 9th house, of your belief systems, or the way you sort of integrate and make sense of the world. There's a whole new worldview that's coming into play. And you got to just mention too, with the Virgo rising, with Mercury retrograde, your ascendant ruler in the 1st house, that's going to, I imagine, have some big shifts on your identity, the way you present yourself to the world, the way you're bringing yourself to the world, your astrological high five, how people are perceiving you or interacting with you. That's, to me, all very intimately and connected this month.
Yeah. I think with Saturn in the 7th, the one thing I would add is that this, Venus retrograde in the 12th, while Saturn is in the 7th, by Pisces, of course, is the exaltation of Venus. So I get this feeling, I wonder about love, and how your worldview is being rapidly transformed because of disappointments in love, because of heartache and hard lessons in love that are serving to enlighten you. Or that what are your blind spots in your personal relationships, and how are they connected to beliefs you have that you're not even aware of? For example, sometimes we overextend ourselves to other people, hoping to earn or gain love by giving. We don't know how to receive so well. And we find out that that's rooted in a philosophy that tends to be about guilt and shame that we don't even know that we have. Maybe it comes from a Christian upbringing or something, where, it's a very common thing I see in my practice. People who grow up in the church, maybe it's a heavy-handed preacher they grow up, with, or something like that. And then they have a philosophy of shame, that I'm not a very good person, that I'm sinful or bad, or that the body is bad or something. And then before you know it, you carry that into the way that you are in relationships. So I just wonder, like, how is your worldview? How are you learning? How are you, whether it's your worldview or your religious or spiritual beliefs, how are those things transforming for you as you're coming into contact with the harder lessons or shadows in love and relationships?
I love that.
Sorry, were you going to say more?
No, I've been thinking a lot about that. Just quickly on this, there's a beautiful movie I saw. Almost been a couple of years ago. It's called Land. It's with Robin Wright. It was on HBO, and it's basically, it's a movie. She's gone through a very traumatic event. She buys a cabin in rural Wyoming, moves to the cabin, and shuts out the entire world. And I always thought of it as a Saturn story, but I think of it as also kind of the Leo in crisis, or the Leo in withdrawal, right? That she buys her castle and shuts herself away in her castle. But through the movie, she realizes she doesn't know how to survive in rural Wyoming by herself. She needs help from the people there. She needs people to interact with her. And maybe how we're also healing, like those harder knocks that Saturn can bring, the losses that it can bring, in maybe realizing that, in that isolation, it's hurting us in some way. We need to open ourselves out, expand out a little bit more to receive in help to move back out into the world in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That movie just came to mind with that. Yeah.
Super interesting. One of the things that comes to my mind is that, my daughter's 7, she's a Virgo rising, and I've been watching this transit play out. And this is not intimately, not really connected to what you were just saying, but one of the things that I noticed as a similar pattern is when things happen and you start to feel different from other people, you realize that, like, for example, my daughter has just been starting to realize through her friendships that she has parents that do some weird shit. My dad is an astrologer is starting to become a real thing for her. And that's like, she's had some, we'll just put it this way. There's been some conversations that we've had to have about how what she's learning from me about the planets, which she loves, she's really into, is not what she's going to hear at school about the planets. And some of her friends may not understand it. And we're, just also figuring out how to coexist with other people when we feel alienated or isolated by our beliefs being different or something like that. And so I was just thinking about that because of that, the movie you mentioned and the withdrawal, and also things that can cause us to withdraw or that can make us feel isolated.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to Libra rising. So with Libra, we've got the Venus retrograde process finishing up in your 11th house, making squares to Jupiter and Uranus in the 8th. I'm going to mention the presence of Mars in your 1st house as well. But for now, what I'll say is that, generally Venus retrograde in the 11th will change something about your relationships with other people, especially groups of people, allies, colleagues, coworkers. And it will also touch on the themes we mentioned earlier with the 11th house, which are your aspirations, your hopes, your wishes, your dreams, and how those are connected to a broader network of people who share similar goals or dreams. So this is your ruling planet as a Libra. So it's a pretty personal time of change in terms of what you're looking for, what you're longing for, and who are the people best suited to sharing those hopes and wishes with. Or changes within organizations that reflect breakdowns in relationships. That would be pretty common for Venus in the 11th retrograde as well. But what's interesting is that there's always, like, when you see something like Jupiter and Uranus in the 8th, you think about amazing opportunities and potential that comes through the resources of other people. This is also a Venus ruled house. So we could very easily be saying, like, here a little bit like a devil's bargain when the 8th and the 11th come up, because you're thinking about allies and you're thinking about resources that come from other people, but they can be very entangling and can actually lead to you being indebted to other people in complicated ways. So for Libras right now, especially with Mars in the 1st house, which can also speak to feeling like you're under the gun, there's a kind of pressure to make decisions, to be ambitious and driven and to take action. But for Librans to do that kind of Mars stuff is not always easy. You're a child of Venus. You'll seek harmony and you'll seek a way of being, gracefully moving and working with other people. But now you have to make tough decisions, and those decisions may have to be a little more selfish than you're comfortable with. On the other hand, you may be looking at the shadows of your own selfishness and how those things, that selfishness is at play in the way that you pull strings and manipulate social situations in what on the surface looks very graceful and socially harmonious, but under the surface may be very contrived and opportunistic or like, selfish. But that would be a shadow you might be looking at. On the other hand, you could be looking at the difficulty in doing something or making choices that aren't going to please everybody, or that are hard for you because they feel selfish, even though it might be more the result of you being a child of Venus than the fact that they are actually selfish. So those kinds of dynamics are what I would be looking at right now for Libras, with specific care for like long-term goals, resources that come from or are shared with other people, and choices that are being made between different kinds of priorities in these areas.
Yeah, riffing off of that, Adam, I think that, starting with Mars actually in the first house, one of the things that can be helpful for Libras, I know as a Libra moon, is assertion and decision, right? There's something that maybe is called upon right now that within the context of what Adam was saying in terms of your social groups and the relationship to other people's resources, your eighth house, there's some need to take a stand, to stand and say, rather than trying to find the harmony, which is usually what we're going for as Libras, is finding the balance, is saying this is actually the way we need to go, or I need to go, or making a definitive stand on that, bringing a little of the opposing sign of Aries into this idea. And I think also just saying quickly, Uranus can be helpful, I think, in the eighth house of if there are entanglements. Uranus can give you a little bit of a push to detangle any enmeshments that you might feel in that eighth house stuff, which can sometimes feel very credit debty, which can be for Libras can lead often to a sense of guilt, like, oh, I did something wrong or bad, or I'm owed, or I owe this or whatever. And Uranus might provide a flash of like, but are you really being selfish, or are you just taking an assertive stand for what you know to be right and what you need?
Right. Yeah. I mean, couldn't Mars in the first house then from that standpoint be about saying, I've got to cut ties with something.
Yeah.
I've got to be free of someone or something that, it's like, I can't be obligated, or I can't be involved in this dynamic any longer.
Yeah. Agreed.
All right, let's go on to Scorpio. We'll put Scorpio on the ascendant, and take it away, Alex.
All right, so Scorpios, we have Venus turning direct in your 10th house in Leo, and we have Jupiter and Uranus making Venus making those squares again to Jupiter and Uranus in your 7th house in Taurus. I could see a lot of changes, shifts, and discussions maybe in relationship turning to your career, because you have Venus, a planet we really do look at a lot as astrologers in terms of relationship in your 10th house, and you also have Jupiter and Uranus in your 7th house of sort of primary relationship. I could see something here around like a shakeup in the beliefs or the philosophies you hold around relationships, or maybe something completely brand new in a relationship that is causing you to think more about how you might find sort of creative enjoyment in your career. That would be a very Venus idea in Leo in the 10th house, or ways that you just are shifting the way you have a relationship to your career based on new shifts and changes that are happening either within a current relationship, or maybe a relationship coming apart, or something new beginning. But there's something around that interweaving tie of the 10th and the 7th here that feels like sort of that Uranian newness, suddenness that shifts the way you're beginning to conceive of your relationship to your career.
Right. Oh, there it is.
There it is, Adam. I knew we could do it. I knew you could do it, man. I always believe.
Back. I'm gonna leave it. I'm gonna leave it there because it's good luck.
That's right. Yep.
I mean, one thing that comes to my mind is the 7th house was called by Indian astrologers, associated with the philosophical domain of life called kama, or the pursuit of pleasure and happiness as a kind of sensual experience, with Venus retrograde in the 10th house, which was called arta, meaning the pursuit of power or mastery or wealth or prominence or um, leadership or something like that. There's, to me, it's like this would, for Scorpios, brushing up against people of power and influence, especially people who are charming, attractive, or trying to become such a person of beauty and influence. There's something about that just popped up when you were talking. I was like, oh, I could see some Scorpios out there chasing some fame. I could see them at this point in time wanting to enhance their sexual appeal, their power, their prestige, their honor, either through advantageous relationships or through polishing of their image or their resume or something. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that. I don't mean to make it sound really shallow and materialistic. This is the interest in pleasure, beauty, power, etc. Is for Indian philosophers was part of life. Like we all seek pleasure. We all seek being good at things or gaining recognition. I mean, my kids, look at what I just made. Look at how beautiful it is. Did I do a good job? It's like there's the recognition of something beautiful, and yes, you're special. Look at you. Like we do that even as adults, right? So I wonder if, look at me, I'm special, I'm beautiful, I'm powerful, I'm interesting, I'm good at something. I wonder what degree those kinds of desires are playing a role for Scorpio right now. And I think Scorpios, with Mars, your ruling planet, in the 12th house, it could be embarrassing or difficult to admit that these are needs that we have to be acknowledged as beautiful or attractive, or to you could easily also have people in your life embodying these themes that you get jealous of, and that you're shit talking, but you don't realize that maybe they're embodying some of the things that you yourself are aiming for. I could see that too.
It's always so interesting to me that Scorpio rising, a very secretive, often very private sign, has Leo as its midheaven, the most prominent, viewable sign in zodiac. It might be a time where some of that, it's okay to recognize that you want to be noticed in some way, that you're presenting yourself to the world. That also allows you to keep some of your own personal space private, which is just, it's always such an interesting juxtaposition for me, the Scorpio rising.
It's really interesting, the lion and the scorpion, and the kind of way in which they regard one another. It's like the scorpion is like, look at you, so full of yourself, to the Leo, and the Leo is like, look at you, so needlessly broody and destructive, and like, oh, they secretly need each other,
Right, but, exactly.
I'm just playing, but okay. Well, some good stuff there for our Scorpios. And let's move into Sagittarius next. Put Sagittarius on the ascendant, and we have Venus finishing her retrograde. Oh, there it's back. I changed it.
It's good luck.
You know what? I'm keeping it. I don't even care.
That's right. No, we can all deal with the big arrow. It's big arrow for a reason.
You're welcome. You're welcome here. So Venus is finishing her retrograde in the 9th house, the place of beliefs, our moral, spiritual, intellectual compass, the process of learning, gaining wisdom and insight. It is also a place of the expansion of our horizons through things like travel and pilgrimage. And so Venus there for Sagittarius has been working on a transformation in your views or beliefs somehow, or it indicates some kind of learning process, an acquisition of knowledge, but it's Venusian. That means, for me, it could come from the plant kingdom. Your teacher has been a mushroom, or it's been pagan, or women's studies, or women's groups, or art, or like the sage in the 9th house reorienting your views has been the goddess on one plane or another. That tracks for me in terms of a simultaneous Jupiter-Uranus movement in the 6th house, a place that is often associated with work, labor, sacrifice, also sickness, But Jupiter Uranus there strikes me as the kind of labor or effort that comes with a lot of enthusiasm. Like you're I don't know, I imagine the excitement of I've been watching this show Outlander. Ashley's really into it. She got me into it, and I'm hooked. But anyway, one of the parts of the show involves they build their own home. You know, they're building a home, and you know, obviously this is like hundreds of years ago. She's a time traveler who goes back through time, and so this is a time where like there wasn't a contractor, like you just built it, you know, like, and people knew how to do such things, you know. So but my point is that energy in the show that I'm reminded of that tracks with Jupiter Uranus in the sixth is of the hard work connected to building something that you're really excited about, you know. And so I wonder if there isn't a labor of love and sacrifice that represents a big breakthrough that's on the horizon for Sagittarius. It's also connected very intimately to this kind of transformation of worldview, beliefs, mindset that Venus is enacting. That's how I'm putting it together.
I've got to watch Outlander. Like, you're like the third person I've heard mention it in the last week for some reason. I think it's like a sign to go watch it.
I'll tell you, it's a really good show. I really enjoy it. Yeah,
I've heard amazing things about it.
I will say it is a very romantic show. The only thing is it's a little rapey. It's a little, because it's like, you know, like Game of Thrones and like these throwbacks to like medieval times, and like all of them, like half of the men are just like salty rapists, and I just like that part of the show really makes me, you know, like but it's also like probably true to how people were you know, during these previous historical eras. Like it was dangerous, you know, especially for, you know, minorities, women. I mean, like, holy shit. So I mean, if you can get past that part of the show, the story, the romance, the cinematography, it's like really beautiful.
Nice. I'll check it out. That was what got me off of Game of Thrones after season 3. I'm like, I can't watch any more of this gratuitous. Like, if someone else's junk comes off, I can't deal with it. Like,
yeah, dude.
Just too much.
No, for sure. Like I see, like Game of Thrones, Vikings is another one. Outlander, where the stories are fantastic. It's a little brutal for some people, so I don't like to recommend it to everyone. But anyway,
anyways, what was I talking about? Just quickly, I was going to say off that, you know, as someone who lives, you know, half an hour away from Salem, Massachusetts, you know, spiritual technologies. I could see, you know, with Venus in the 9th house, you know, going up, you know, there's plenty of stores in Salem that have all sorts of, whether it's Wicca or other forms of like different sort of the feminine occult, there's all sorts of interesting technologies with spell books and all these sorts of things that are in essentially a spiritual technology and understanding of that. And maybe with Uranus and Venus, particularly in a square from this axis, I could see something like that.
I wonder with Saturn in the 4th for Sagittarius, if part of what we're describing isn't also tied to a pretty heavy energy working its way through the 4th house of home and family and ancestry and things like that. Well, let's go on to Capricorn.
All right. So Capricorn rising, we got Venus turning direct in your 8th house in Leo, and squaring by the big arrow. The big arrow is amazing.
It's here to stay.
It's here. Yeah, no, keep it. Like I say, shine your light. Don't dim it. Jupiter and Uranus in your 5th house. All right, this is interesting because like I could see this being a little bit about where you may have felt like through obligations to others, or whether you were obligated or there was an obligation around like Venusian type things. So obviously the 8th house can often have to do with money, but it can have to do with relationally or in the interpersonal relationships. How resolving some of that might allow you to just break free and enjoy things that you truly genuinely enjoy. I keep coming back to some conversations I've had with Capricorn risings in the last couple of months, Adam, about what is fun for you may not be overtly fun for somebody else, but like you might really enjoy something that is uniquely yours to enjoy. And I feel like there's something around this with Venus turning direct in the 8th house of like feeling like, oh, I shouldn't, or people will think this, or it's not the prudent or diligent thing to do, or I might feel guilty or obligated in some way. As that gets left behind with Jupiter and Uranus, there's a sense of like, I just like what I like. These are my beliefs. This
Mm,
is how I believe about life. This is how I believe about, enjoyment. And yes, it might look different. A Capricorn rising might have a different sense of that from, from other signs, but that it's uniquely yours, and you have that expression of that genuine authenticity is really necessary in terms of enjoyment and creativity.
yeah, yeah, I like that. I think about this combination also strikes me as people looking at their fears and inhibitions around sex and pleasure.
Yeah.
Because Venus, the eighth house was called the house of fear and anxiety. And because the planet is preparing to set, so there's this kind of ominous, like preparing to die kind of quality, preparing to enter the underworld. So it has this like, yeah, approaching the underworld anticipation to it. And then with Jupiter and Uranus in the fifth house, which is really like, well, there happens to be a dance party happening in the underworld, and everyone's really enjoying themselves. It turns out, I wonder if there isn't some kind of breakthrough around pleasure, a Venusian, sensual, embodied, letting go, of
Yeah,
inhibitions or fears that isn't part of this. But the same thing could also be about processing trauma that's come up, that's blocked us from feeling the body as a pleasurable, safe place.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the idea of really, the the idea of re-inhabiting yourself in some way comes up from that, Adam, that you're
Mhm.
saying, like, re-inhabiting yourself, and therefore what is your body, what are your natural creative or sexual procreative desires saying, what are they
Mhm.
looking for, in your genuine sense.
In that tracks with Pluto finishing up in the first house for
For sure.
Capricorns, I think,
Yeah,
too.
for sure. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Aquarius. Well, for Aquarius, it's very straight. The topic is very straightforward because you kind of have a doubling of the theme of relationship, sex, love, marriage with Venus retrograde in the seventh. Oh, now she's pink. All right.
Yes,
All sorts. It's
that's when I say
like,
it's the RuPaul hour.
yes. It's like the arrow is like, you know what? There's something other than blue, guys. Okay,
Exactly.
fair enough.
Even it
I'm
out.
I'm here for it. Let's do it. So Venus is retrograde in the seventh house for Aquarians. It's a place of relationships and love, and the retrograde there can be signifying a reworking of old wounds, and healing of old wounds, a reworking of old patterns, breakthroughs and transformation, a death and rebirth happening around the topic of love, marriage, relationships, women, sisters. Venus is dying and being reborn, especially in the seventh house, the place of the setting sun. It's a dramatic death and rebirth for Venus in that house. But it's also tied intimately to Jupiter Uranus, trying to slowly creating this powerful breakthrough around home, family, roots, living environment, ancestral trauma, ancestral lineage, the living space that you inhabit. So, you know, ultimately, the question of how Venus is dying and being reborn as the lover, the goddess, the provider of pleasure, the beautifier, is tied really intimately right now to the simultaneous need for some kind of transformation of your roots. And I know I happen to know an Aquarius rising who, at the end of September, will be getting married. I think that's just perfect example of someone
Hmm.
who's, and this happens to be their second marriage, right? So it's
Hmm.
like this rebirthing. They're giving marriage another shot, and
Hmm.
that's just one example. But and then they will be you know moving in not too long. And I suspect, if I had to guess when they would purchase a home together as a newly married couple, it'll probably be when Jupiter gets to Uranus next spring. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's like that kind of, those areas are connected really intimately right now for Aquarians.
Mm. It's like, the word that keeps coming to mind for some around that for the fourth house for Aquarians right now is a renaissance around your home, a renaissance around that signature of Jupiter and Uranus has a very sort of renaissance feeling to it, a reorganization of finding, I think what's interesting, and I think especially in spiritual and therapeutic work, there can be this idea of like we dig into our past to uncover our trauma and heal it. And that can be one part of it, but also we can dig into our past to find a lot of really amazing nuggets of wisdom and knowledge and our ancestry and like, you know, where we come from and who we are and how we hold ourselves and believe ourselves to be from that. And how it affects the way, again, with Venus in the seventh house, how we relate to others, how we
Yeah.
be with others, you know?
That's so interesting that you mentioned that, because the fourth house was called the place of mines and buried treasure. So like gems within the earth, that was all the fourth house of this kind of underworld. So interesting because, you know, when you do that and those ancestry tests, you know, you can find all this information about your past, and there's probably some things you could find that are a little, you know, revealing or like scary, but also like you can find treasures. My dad did this, and it turns out that this would be on my dad's mother's side, if I'm remembering this correctly. But several generations back, my grandmother's like great grandpa or something's brother was James Fenimore Cooper, who wrote Last of the Mohicans.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was like, wow, that's really fascinating. What was even more fascinating about that was that was my favorite book in like probably like my sophomore year of high school. I went because I think it was right around that time the movie came out. I don't know if you remember the
Oh yeah.
What was the guy's name? He's
was it Daniel Day-Lewis?
Day-Lewis.
Yeah.
So that movie had come out. I had the soundtrack, and I loved the book. And then it turns out that my grandmother's maiden name was Cooper, and anyway, it goes back up. But so you can find like legitimate jewels in the ancestral past. It's not just crap. I think it's such a good point.
Yeah, it just feels really, with Jupiter and Uranus there particularly, it's like that's a really nice signature for those discoveries when they're there.
Well, let's go on to our last of the signs to look at today, which is Pisces.
Pisces. Let's see. So Pisces rising, you have Venus turning direct in Leo in your sixth house, and we have Jupiter squaring Jupiter in the pink Jupiter and Uranus in your third house.
The largest square that has ever happened.
But don't let that scare you, Pisces. It's okay. It's all right. It's just a big arrow. Let me see. So, you know, I would say one thing because I had some sixth, third house squares going on a number of years ago. And one of the things with the sixth house is it can be a definite detour, and they can be tough detours that you take. Like you can feel like you're going one way and like, oh shit, now I'm going a whole other way. But it shook me up in the right way in things I had been complacent about in my everyday life that I really needed to change. And I could see a scenario like this happening around Venus and the creative topics of Venus, being around sexuality or relationships or your relational style. And it's sort of, you know, maybe being tough to see, or a little bit of having been a long slog or an unexpected detour that is taking some time to repair and move through. But in moving through it and taking the time to really move through it thoroughly, there's a really nice shakeup and new beginning, or like we were just saying, kind of a renaissance in just what surrounds you every day, that you become less attenuated to that everyday environment, and it kind of comes a little bit more dissonant. And then you decide like, oh, you know, actually, this habit has been in place for so long, and it might take some work to change, but it's going to beneficially change what surrounds me every day.
Yeah. I think I told the story recently of there was a Venus retrograde story that came in, and that I used for an episode in the sixth house, and it involved a woman's cat dying. And this was like a beloved, you know, probably, and it sounded like the cat was, I don't remember the age. It was like, you know, it was old. It had been like, cats get to be like 16 or something. So anyway, this cat had been around forever, and it died. And the healing crisis and transformation that this person described was tremendous. I mean, it was like, whoa, I have never had super close relationships to pets. My dog, we have a dog, and that'll be, gosh, we've had her for like 10 years. So when she passes eventually, that'll break my heart. But otherwise, growing up, I was never super tight. There was one dog we had that I was pretty close with, but I've never experienced something like that. So it's hard for me to imagine losing a pet and how it could be as transformative as for some people as losing a person, you know. But this is how she was describing it. It was that powerful. And, you know, I was like, wow. But that tracks with this kind of transit where the shakeup, the rebirth, the renewal, your environment changing dramatically because of some kind of loss or difficulty, or the sixth house was called the house of misfortune. Something going off, you know, off script, or something happening that's difficult that represents a pain or a loss or some kind of painful reconfiguring. Ultimately, in this case, with the square to Jupiter and Uranus, should be a very positive thing, even if it's painful in the process. Like you said, you work through it thoroughly, it should yield some pretty good results.
Yeah, that's what I found with the sixth house. If you're commit to the thorough, full process, there's usually some really powerful stuff on the other side of that.
Yeah, that could be something to do with relationships, given Mercury's retrograde in the seventh house for Pisces right now too. Like I wouldn't be surprised if some of this reconfiguring had to do with some big changes in certain key relationships. But anyway, cool. That takes us through all 12 signs. I think we did anything you want to add?
No, I think, you know, this month feels actually pretty nice as a way to kind of tie the summer together. You know, if you really put, you know, Venus's retrograde this summer has been so interesting, as it's been a real summer transit. It began in June. It's going to end in September. She's going to move into Virgo in October. So I just feel like this is a really nice way to tie it all together.
Yeah.
This month. Yeah.
A pretty healthy looking Mercury retrograde, finishing up, avoiding the malefics. The Venus retrograde hitting Jupiter and Uranus, both of which have been pretty positive for most people over the summer. There's been some difficult stuff, but these squares to Jupiter and Uranus are usually pushing us forward in some way. And it's exciting, even if it's painful in the process at its worst. Yeah, so good stuff. It was really nice to have you on again. If you guys want to check out Alex's work, go to alexamorosihealing.com. Or alexamorosi.com, excuse me. And then Instagram is Alex Amorosi Healing. You can learn more about his readings and offerings. Anything else you want to promote before we go?
No, just, you know, one thing I've just been doing lately is a hybrid astrology intuitive reading, which has been people have really liked that. So I kind of bring both sides of my skills in that regard to one reading and bounce between them. And it's been really, really fun and interesting to incorporate those together. Again, Jupiter and Uranus in my 10th house.
Yeah, there you go.
So change of that, you know? Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you again for being here. Can't wait to be unpacking some of the astrology of eclipse season, which will be coming up in October. Next month, we will be looking at eclipse horoscopes. So stay tuned for that. And like I said, in the meantime, be sure to check out Alex's work. It's also, you can find his information in the description of this video. And be sure to follow him on Instagram. That's Alex Amorosi Healing, where he does a lot of really fun content too. So
thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great to
everybody.
be here.
Yeah. We'll see you guys again next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.